Last strawberry season, I grew a bunch of different varieties of strawberries, and today I'm going to review each of them. I grew 10 different varieties of Alpine strawberries. 5 of them were red varieties and 5 were white varieties. I started these from seeds that I bought online from a website called the Strawberry Store. I also grew Des Bois, which is an ever-bearing variety, and I bought the bare roots online from Jung Seed. And I also grew 3 June-bearing short-day varieties that are considered good for growing in my Florida climate. These were Sequoia, Sweet Charlie, and Sweet Sensation. I grew each of these varieties from bare roots. The Sequoia and Sweet Charlie bare roots came from Willis Orchard Company, and the Sweet Sensation bare roots I bought from Parksdale Farmers Market in Plant City, Florida. I also grew 3 varieties of strawberries that are supposed to be wild types. 2 of the wild varieties were started from seed from the Strawberry Store, the same place where I got the Alpine strawberry seeds. And 1 type I got as roots from a seller on Etsy, who unfortunately I don't think is selling them anymore. Here are some of the strawberries side by side so you can get an idea of the size differences between them. So the Alpine strawberries are the smallest. I have a bunch of different varieties of Alpine strawberries, but they're all really small. They come in both white and red. So these are actually ripe. They just stay white, and they are still sweet, even though they don't look like they're ripe. They are. And then Sweet Charlie, right next to these Alpine, are the biggest. And they're very sweet and tasty. And then Des Bois is pretty small. It's kind of a medium-sized berry. They're really sweet and tasty. And then Sweet Sensation is kind of a medium-sized berry. I'll compare it next to the Sweet Charlie. So some of the Sweet Sensation are bigger than this. This is just kind of, the batch I picked today are sort of smaller ones. A lot of them will be bigger than this, but most of the time they're still not as big as Sweet Charlie. Some of them will be. And then this is Sequoia, but this is not a very good example because most of the Sequoia that I've grown are bigger than this, but compared to Sweet Charlie, it's pretty small, but usually they have medium to large size berries. This is just a particularly small one. I have another one that isn't quite ripe yet that I wanted to pick because it's a much bigger size. It's almost as big as the Sweet Charlie, but it just wasn't ripe enough to pick. And then again, more of the Alpine. And as for flavor, the Alpine berries are very sweet and they are good, but they don't taste quite like I would normally expect a strawberry to taste like. I mean, they do taste strawberry-ish, but they don't have quite the same flavor as what I'm used to. And I really prefer the bigger strawberries like I'm used to. And I like the strawberry flavor that I'm used to. I probably won't grow the Alpines again because they are so small. I mean, the berries they produce are small, but the plants take up just as much space, and I don't like them as well as some of the other strawberries. So in the future, I probably won't keep growing the Alpine ones unless I just grow them as like a ground cover or something. Generally, the fruit quality of the Alpine berries was pretty good. They were not prone to rotting or splitting, but the berries were very soft and they didn't keep for very long, so it's best to eat them fresh. All of the different varieties of Alpine strawberries were pretty similar in terms of fruit quality and general characteristics, but they did have a lot of differences in flavor. So I've tried to rate the flavors of the different varieties on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the best tasting and 1 being the least good tasting. These are the red varieties of Alpine strawberries that I grew: Reine de Vallees, Bowlenzauber, Mignonette, Solemacher, and Reugen. Of the red varieties, I really liked the taste of the first 3 the best. Reine de Vallees, Bowlenzauber, and Mignonette, they all tasted good. They were really sweet and kind of reminded me of candy. But Solemacher and Reugen, I just didn't like them as much. They tasted okay, kind of like candy, but just not quite as sweet or tasty. The white Alpine varieties that I grew were Pineapple Crush, Ivory, White Solemacher, Yellow Wonder, and White Soul. Out of these varieties, Pineapple Crush was definitely the best tasting. It was really sweet and good. And Ivory was also pretty good, but White Solemacher, Yellow Wonder, and White Soul were not that great tasting, so I wouldn't grow any of those 3 again. Des Bois has a really good and unique flavor, and it was one of the best tasting varieties that I grew. But unfortunately, this variety did not do great in my Florida climate. As for production, Des Bois is an ever-bearing variety, so it didn't produce as many berries at one time like most of my other varieties did, but they did produce berries during several different seasons during the year. So I'd rate them as a 3 out of 5 for production. The biggest problem I had with Des Bois was the fruit quality. The berries would often split or get little lines in them where it looks like they were starting to split. This seemed to happen the most during the warmer, rainy weather, so I think it might have something to do with humidity or too much water. Since the berries were prone to splitting, I only gave them a 2 out of 5 for fruit quality. But despite its poor fruit quality, Des Bois has a really good flavor when ripe, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 for flavor. Overall, I gave Des Bois a total score of 9 out of a possible 15. I don't really recommend this variety for Florida unless you just want to experiment and can baby your plants. But if you live in a cooler climate where ever-bearing varieties do well, then I would recommend it. Sequoia was a decent producer, but was not one of the most productive, so I gave it a 4 out of 5 for production. The berries were not prone to cracking or rotting, so I would say that the fruit quality was good. Since most of the berries that were produced were healthy and unblemished, I gave Sequoia a 4 out of 5 for fruit quality. However, the Sequoia strawberries had a lot of variability in flavor. Sometimes the Sequoias would be really sweet and tasty, and sometimes they would be too tart. I think the variability in flavor was due to various weather conditions, but some of the other varieties I grew did not have as much variation in flavor, so I only gave Sequoia a 3 out of 5 for flavor. My total score for Sequoia is an 11 out of 15. Sweet Charlie was a good producer, so I gave it a 4 out of 5. It was second only to Sweet Sensation for being the most productive variety. The fruit quality of Sweet Charlie was consistently very good, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 for fruit quality. The best thing about Sweet Charlie is that the berries were consistently very sweet and tasty, no matter what the weather conditions were like. The flavor also tasted the most like what I think of as the real strawberry flavor, but that's subjective, of course. Sweet Charlie wasn't the absolute best tasting berry I've ever had, but it was high on the list, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 for flavor. So the total score I gave Sweet Charlie is a 13 out of 15. Sweet Sensation was definitely the most productive variety I've grown, so I gave it a 5 out of 5 for production. However, the berries were often blemished and were more prone to rotting than any of the other varieties that I grew, so I only gave them a 3 out of 5 for fruit quality. Sweet Sensation had the typical strawberry flavor that I like, and they were sweet and tasted similar to the strawberries that you buy at the grocery store, but most of the time they were pretty underwhelming. The Sweet Sensation also seemed to have some inconsistency in flavor. Most of the time I thought that the Sweet Sensation tasted a little watered down and bland, but every once in a while I would get a berry from the Sweet Sensation plants that tasted wonderful. There were like 3 or 4 Sweet Sensation berries during the whole season that had the best flavor of any of the strawberries I've grown. But since only a few of the Sweet Sensation berries tasted delicious and the majority of them were sort of bland, I only gave them a 3 out of 5 for flavor. So the total score I gave Sweet Sensation is an 11 out of 15. If I could figure out how to manipulate the growing conditions to get the Sweet Sensation berries to all taste like the 3 or 4 really good ones, then it would score much higher. But so far, I'm not sure exactly what caused the variation in flavor. So for now, it still has a lower score. The wild varieties I tried were Fragaria, Virginiana, something just called Woodland Strawberry, and a random nameless variety that was dug up from an Etsy seller's yard in Michigan, which turned out to be the only one that was good. And I don't know what it was or how to get more, except that I still have some growing. So the first two, the Fragaria Virginiana and the Woodland Strawberry, if they ever produced any fruit, I didn't see it happen. Usually whenever I would check, it just seemed like they were growing lots and lots of runners. And it may be that at some point in the year when I had just given up looking and checking for strawberries, maybe they produced a couple, or would have eventually if I just had let them go indefinitely. But I never did see a fruit on either of those. They would make a good ground cover. They were very hardy and spread really easily, but no fruit from them. So definitely won't be growing those again unless for some reason I want a ground cover. And then the ones that came from the Etsy seller, they were very similar to that. They just mostly grew leaves and runners, but they did eventually at one point produce some berries in the summertime, just a few, not very many, but they were sweet and delicious and had a really nice strawberry flavor. So the unknown variety from Etsy was my favorite of the 3 wild type varieties. But it's so rare for any of these plants to produce any berries that I don't really think it's worth it to try to grow any of them unless you just want a ground cover. So of all the varieties I grew last season, Sweet Charlie was definitely the winner. I highly recommend this variety, especially for Florida gardeners. Sweet Sensation was the most productive variety that I grew, and it would be my next choice after Sweet Charlie. For Florida gardeners, Sequoia would be my third choice, but for non-Florida gardeners in climates that can grow ever-bearing strawberry varieties, then Des Bois would be my third choice. I wouldn't really recommend growing the smaller Alpine or wild woodland types of strawberries unless you have plenty of time and space to grow them, or if you just want an edible ground cover. If you do want to try growing one of the smaller varieties, then my top recommended varieties of Alpine strawberries are Reine to Valley, Bowlenzauber, Mignonette, and Pineapple Crush. This coming strawberry season, I will be growing Sweet Charlie again, and I'll be trying out the varieties Chandler and Festival to see how they compare. I'll do reviews on those 2 varieties after I try them. Happy gardening!